Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first webinar in the Clubhouse of Development webinar series. The Cogeo team is very excited to be able to launch this project with Tennessee Soccer and offer our fundraising advice to all its members. First, I'm going to try to unmute Hans so he can say hi to everybody. All right.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you okay.
Perfect. Hey, thanks for letting me speak for a second. For our members, I just wanted to jump on here and let you know kind of the purpose, the process for this. And so many times we don't get an opportunity to talk about fundraising, sponsorship, marketing, those things. And, to be completely honest, the guy that was the expert in our office is no longer with us, took a job and left us, unfortunately. But anytime we can find partners, we want to partner with people that know more than we do and give back to our membership. Our mission is always to make a difference, to lead, to serve, and inspire. And by partnering with Cogeo, what we found was we found a group that can serve our membership very, very well in terms of these topics in this conversation. So with that, I'll turn it over to them, but I'm really, really excited for you guys to be with them. They recently did a partnership with Georgia, and I got to listen. So I'm excited about this, and I'm on here listening too.
Great. Thanks, Hans. Okay, so we'll introduce you to us a little bit. Hans did a great job. We'll give you some additional background info. Before I do this, I did want to say, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can use the GoToWebinar tool, and it will allow you to type questions in there, and we'll review those after the presentation is done to make sure those get answered. Okay, a little bit about us. The Cogeo team has 7 years of fundraising experience and raised over $750 million for more than 200 nonprofit organizations. And we are a key leader in the sports-related 501c3 fundraising and organizational industry. Our work spans multiple sports with the nonprofit industry and geographical regions within the U.S. And one particular reason that we're passionate about working with sports and soccer clubs such as yourselves is that our executive management were involved and played the game both as soccer players and coaches. And that includes Rob, who will be your speaker today. As I mentioned, Rob was a player and a coach. He was an All-American during his playing days at Williams College and coached the Napa United U16 girls team to a win at the 2012 NorCal State Premier Cup. Now, Rob is the managing director of consulting services at Cogeo and has helped hundreds of sports organizations implement strong organizational development and fundraising strategies. And that includes his time as director of development at Stanford University, where he raised funds for the initial field of the Stanford soccer stadium. He's also directed the founding development efforts for the YSC Academy, which raised $1.3 million for Philadelphia Union. And he's led a gifts initiative for the San Francisco Elite Academy and directed the Westmont United Soccer Association in a 3-year, $3.2 million campaign. And that built 2 lit fields and its headquarters. And so with that, I will pass it over to Rob.
Thanks, Mel. So slide 3 demonstrates that we're going to be discussing the first of 8 sessions during this webinar series. It'll be 1 session a month, beginning this month. And today's topic is Introduction to the Concepts, and it's named Effective Communication with Your Membership. The next slide is the Clubhouse of Development, and it's a really good representation of all things fundraising from the bottom up. And this is a particularly useful slide to leverage with boards of directors who oftentimes will say, well, we need to fundraise, and they bring up an idea or two, whereas what they really should be thinking about is a comprehensive, sustainable effort over the years. So what we know is every club has a website, which acts as its principal communication and outreach tool, which is a huge advantage over what it used to be like as recently as 25 years ago. That being said, the key is to effectively communicate and create outreach opportunities that go beyond membership dues and information around results, things like that. So what we're going to focus on today is really talking about how to effectively raise incremental revenue to the bottom line. That, as Mel pointed out earlier, can be really significant, whether for programs or for capital build-outs, of which we're doing many today around the country. So the next slide, what are the goals and context for today? We're going to look at four things. We're going to define awareness and understanding of what a development fundraising campaign is. What does that mean? We're going to talk about the relevance and understand the role of communication within the various parts of development fundraising campaigns. Roles, who's responsible for what type of communication within the fundraising work, the development work. And then finally, we'll touch on data management. There's really good news there in the industry, and we'll talk about how clean and organized data systems are critical for executing effective communication and success over time. So the next slide, what is development fundraising? Well, it's a euphemism really for making friends and monetizing friends. That's what it's all about. So development, the process of creating and enhancing relationships with current and potential donors to promote the likelihood of securing current and future funding. So again, it's taking a relationship, demonstrating needs, and then monetizing that. And what's a development campaign? It's an ongoing, coordinated performance of fundraising activity to attract and engage current and prospective donors to financially support a club's identified areas of programmatic and or capital projects needs. And we'll talk in more detail about the key areas of funding that we're seeing around soccer academies and clubs and leagues and governing bodies. Why is fundraising important for a club? Well, it's important for both 501c3 nonprofit clubs and for-profit clubs because essentially it's incremental revenue that can be gathered over time, and oftentimes it can be significant incremental revenue. So next slide, just to give you a little bit of background, as I just mentioned, in terms of our own capacity in interacting with hundreds of clubs around the country over the last decade. Here's what we found. So we've talked to over 500 clubs, and what we've discovered is that there's four areas of focus around fundraising. Financial aid or scholarship for deserving socioeconomically disadvantaged players and their families. So providing access in the current pay-to-play model is really important. We're seeing a big push on facilities, both in terms of rehabilitation as well as putting together new facilities. And when I say rehabilitation, generally it's two things. It's turfing existing grass fields as well as lighting complexes. And that's been very prevalent around the country. To give you an idea, we're currently, in terms of facilities, we're currently working with a club in Northern California on creating a two-field complex lit. That's a Walnut Creek Surf. Another club in Northern California, Ballistic United, same concept. Around the country, we're working with Lake Country Soccer in Springfield, Missouri. They've got a 16-field complex where we just secured $5 million from City Council Parks and Recreation, all of which was linked to economic vitality within the city. And then finally, another good example would be in Orlando City, the Seminole Complex, where you may have been there in Sanford, Florida. And again, it's a full renovation, turfing everything and lighting everything in light of the World Cup in 2026 coming up. And that's a comprehensive project. It's a stadium and I think 11 fields. So facilities are big. We're seeing a lot of that around the country. Well, quickly, another example is the Hans's counterpart in Oregon The Oregon Youth Soccer Association has decided that they want to potentially build out a big complex in Salem, Oregon, working with 4 or 5 clubs to really make sure the complex gets leveraged, both at the state and national level, but also at the local level. So that's an example of a governing body taking. We're also talking to New Hampshire about rehabilitating one of their current facilities and growing it as well. So as you can see, there's lots out there, and it's an important piece because it does correlate to more success given opportunities. The third area is coaching education. Simply, instead of having coaches pay out of pocket for their licensing and other opportunities, really the club takes it on through incremental fundraising. And parents get that. They get the reality there, that it's important. And then finally, the fourth area is equipment and technology. We're seeing in-kind giving as well as fundraising against that. There's more and more technology. There needs to be refreshment on equipment, as we know, whether it's goals, whether it's balls, jerseys, etc. And of all of our 500 calls, meetings, only 2 clubs had a director of business development on staff, which is to say, as Mel pointed out, and Hans reinforced, we're making the market, and we're actually seeing a lot of growth, but certainly the market is still very, very new, and the adoption rate is high, and there's still can be a lot of adoption. We would say maybe 1 to 2% of clubs are actually engaged in these kinds of activities, which is way too low. So those are the key areas. Next slide. The board of directors. They bear a lot of responsibility in decision-making for the club. And Stanford University Graduate School of Business did a survey several years back on leadership and management in the nonprofit sector. And they identified areas that might be considered difficult. And among the 7 areas that they identified, the most difficult in terms of struggle were board governance, so the creation and maintenance of a board, and then funding. So you can see these 2 areas are tough. And when I say board governance, it's having the right board members overseeing the agency at the right time, given its strategic imperatives facing the agency. So this is important for you to understand that it is a problem and a challenge in a large segment of the 501c3 sector. But it can be fixed. That's the good news. Next slide. Now, this is really important to know because we're seeing a lot of board dilution in terms of activities and having them engage at the programmatic level in clubs and getting involved with tournament management, with league sign-ups, and all sorts of activities really that should be done by administration. But given the lack of resources, it's not uncommon for board members to step in. And that's not a good thing at all, because we do know that the board members should have 2 responsibilities. The first is to oversee the executive director and or technical director, whomever the top employee or the top 2 employees are within the club, the academy. And that's hiring, managing, and firing. And really that's their key primary responsibility. The second responsibility is overseeing the financial well-being of the club or the academy. And that's fiduciary responsibility. Well, and that's it, right? The only person that reports to the board of directors is the executive director or whomever has a top position in the agency, the CEO, the president. The rest of the workers, the coaches, everybody reports to the CEO. They should not be communicating with board members. And then, so the fiduciary piece, responsibility, well, it revolves around business development, membership dues, making sure that there's revenue generation across an array of activities. And development, fundraising should be considered as an essential element in terms of incremental revenue opportunities whether or not you're 501c3 or a for-profit. Now, how would it work for a for-profit? We've done it recently with San Francisco Club in San Francisco United, where we set up a foundation. And it's the foundation which supports the efforts of the for-profit club, as long as they're charitable in intent. And it's worked magnificently well. We set up a board of directors and have raised nearly $50,000 in, I think, the first 4 months. That's a strong success story. All around programs, no facilities yet. So again, 2 responsibilities for the board of directors: oversee the executive director and fiduciary responsibility. So what's their role? Next slide, number 10, in terms of engaging them in the fundraising process. Well, they're very specific roles. The first would be to make an annual contribution at whatever level they're comfortable, because board members have different levels of wealth and therefore capacity. But the key is that we get 100% board participation. Why? Because in fundraising, you're going to look at foundations. Foundations are in the business of giving away money. And they're increasing both in numbers and in size, given the economic boom that's occurring. And therefore, they have more capacity than ever in terms of, and in our research, we found that many foundations, regionally, locally, are keen on supporting welfare, child, education, things like that. And so they're highly relevant. And in order to approach a foundation, generally you have to have 100% board contributions in that fiscal year. So key that they make an annual contribution. And then beyond making the contribution, it's really communicating and being on board with the development efforts and being a cheerleader and an advocate. And they can do one of 4 things. They can host or attend a cultivation event, a fundraising event, where people are educated about what's being fundraised against. They can review parent lists, prospect lists. They can join the executive director or the technical director or the director of coaching in major gift meetings. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And the 4th thing they can do is augment on donor stewardship where it's relevant. A good example would be a gift comes in from a parent, a set of parents. 2 of the board members know them really well. Well, in addition to the form letter going out on behalf of the club, they can also augment on stewardship by writing a personal email saying how grateful they are for their friend's contribution to the club on which they are on the board. So it's managed work and certainly can be driven by the director internally. Next slide, number 11, is something that all of our clients do, whether they're in a capital campaign or not. And that's creating an annual case statement. And we're going to explore a few in a second. We'll click over to the Cogeo site now and we can take a look at well, we could take a look at the YSC Academy. You mentioned them earlier, and then San Francisco Elite Academy. We'll take a quick glance at those 2. So what's a case statement? It's really, it's a prospectus, it's a deck, it's a document that really outlines all of the opportunities for fundraising around the areas that are really important in that particular fiscal year. And so what is it? It's an overview history of the club, description of the programs and the community benefits, the vision for the future, a timeline on what's going to be executed, and then what it costs. And then you solidify it up by having leadership demonstration as well as testimonials and engaging pictures. So why don't we click on the Cogeo.us case link. And I mentioned San Francisco United. You can see it's the top left. It's one of the most recent ones. Why don't we scroll down to YSC Academy.
I don't know if that one's listed in our case.
There now. Let's do then.
We have
I
San
don't know.
Francisco Elite Academy right here.
There it is. Okay, let's do San Francisco Elite Academy. Let's go ahead and click on that. And we'll just scroll down methodically now from page to page. So you can see the first page. Do you have it open?
Yeah, it's open on the first page.
First page is their logo, very simple first page. Then the content table, the next page. The following page is the mission overview, complemented by some nice pictures. And then some testimonials from the chair of the board, as well as a couple parents. The overview, when they were founded very recently. And this is an interesting story because they were founded with the intent of keeping all the top players in the city of San Francisco. There had been flight away to San Jose and to Marin and East Bay. And that meant having a generous financial aid package from the get-go. And so that's why they hired us, really, was to help them raise significant funds, which we did. Yeah, so now they're able to really make a difference. So if you keep scrolling down, you'll see the components on page 11 really focused on financial aid on the right side there. Then again, the next page, a couple quotes, pictures. Page 18, it gives credibility to Dame Romney from the LA Galaxy. And then on page 22, 23, you can see here the funding opportunities in terms of the 5-year statement of needs. So facilities, financial aid, heavy, $945,000, coaching, and equipment and technology. And the good news is they've been raising at a rate of about $200,000 a year under our guidance, including a $500,000 5-year pledge from a major foundation, which essentially guarantees them $100,000 a year for the next, well, it began 2 years ago, so they still have a 3-year runway. Anyway, that gives you a sense of the case statement. You can go back to that particular link on your own and go through other case statements. And there are also some good case studies on the site as well. So back to the PowerPoint. The next slide, number 12. So once you have a case statement, it's really about understanding your membership, because those are your primary prospects. And what we do is very much data-driven, as well as a little bit of science, a little bit of art. The data-driven side is just taking a club's membership or any agency's membership and doing a wealth screening and getting a sense of which entities have a net worth of over $1 million. So the software essentially has an algorithm which screens all of these entities and then spits out a spreadsheet where anyone with a net worth over $1 million is identified. So it's very powerful because it also provides foundation affiliations as well as the areas that they support from a fundraising standpoint. And then the second piece about this is the art of it. It's the science, and it's leveraging social relationships, leveraging the board of directors and their knowledge, leveraging coaches who really know their teams, understanding, because once you have the wealth data, then it's just trying to understand, okay, what's their affinity? Do they really enjoy their experience? Are their kids having a great time? If we're thinking about parents, obviously. And team managers are also a great resource, again, to understand the dynamics of the relationship between the parent group and the club, if it's not known. The next slide, what we do with our client, we segment and prioritize the membership, right? Anyone that they want analyzed, that they feel should be a friend of the club, and it goes beyond the current parent membership. It's past parents, it can be community leaders, it extends out. But the characteristic that they have, the top bullet point, is a AAA characteristic. They have a high affinity toward the club and its work. They have access into the community, and cherry on the cake, they might be rich, right? And that'll be identified again in the well screening. And there are really three interesting types of prospects. If they made the high screening level and they had that wealth over the threshold of $1 million, then they can be considered potentially major gift prospects. Retail prospects are those who screened at lower levels, and they are managed a little bit differently. We'll talk about that in a second. And then beyond the major gift and retail, you're always looking for leadership to help with campaigns. And so you're looking for type A personalities that might be good steering committee prospects who have those AAA characteristics, or at least AA, affinity and access to the community and to funding sources, but they're really well connected. And they're really committed to making sure your club gets the kind of access that it deserves in terms of funding sources. And so when we put together steering committees for campaigns, which we do on a daily basis, there's no magic number. It's as many as possible that are legitimate, that are going to do it for the right reason, not for their own self-aggrandizement. You know, it's not about ego fulfillment. It's literally about making sure the club gets the opportunities that it deserves, given its standing in the community. So the next slide, assembling leadership. I already touched on this a little bit, but what should steering committee members be like? Well, they should be aware of the case statement and the fundraising initiatives that are being put forth. Again, their role is to connect potential donors to the club, because it's not about them. It's about the club, and it's about the kids' experience at the club. Therefore, there's no shyness involved here. And they, when available, they should attend any events and presentations as leaders and supporters of all things fundraising and development. So where do you find these people? Well, board of directors, both current and past, they're naturals, particularly past board members who may have some time on their hand and really get this. Once you've done the wealth screening and you've identified folks that actually have wealth and have contacts, then you can do the art piece, which is go to the team managers and the coaches and understand what the relationship is between, if you don't know, between that particular family and the club. And then other close stakeholders in the club's community. We've had terrific coaches on steering committees and others who weren't obvious at the start, but became very effective over time. So don't be discriminatory in terms of bringing people on. Anybody who says that they want to do it for the right reasons, they should be considered. And then the picture on the left is a snapshot of YFC Academy uniforms. You can see the union logo on their socks. So next slide, cute picture on the right. That's great. Major Gifts campaign is something that can be launched literally immediately once the case statement is done and the well screening has been accomplished and you've got a steering committee put together. So the idea of raising money in a big way can start literally 2 months once you get into this. And what does it take to launch an individual engagement major gift program for high net worth individuals in particular? We also look at foundations and businesses as well. I'll touch on that in a second. To launch, you need a case statement. We just talked about that. You need a prioritized prospect list, well screening, and other club intelligence, as I just discussed. And the executive director and the director of coaching are the point people generally in terms of defining engagement tactics and how best to leverage the board and other individuals. And to sustain, to really make sure that you're doing this correctly and getting to all the right entities that you feel need to be in play for the campaign, particularly when you don't have direct access to any individual who may be part of the leadership team of the business, of the foundation, of a couple that is of interest, then you triangulate. You find somebody that knows them, that knows you well, and you get to them through that person. And that's called triangulation, and we use it all the time in major gift work. Data management, I mentioned that's something that we install on our clients immediately because most soccer clubs have good software when it comes to membership management. and communication management, but not when it comes to fundraising and development. But the good news here is that there's a free product that's arguably the best in the market, and that's Salesforce.com for nonprofits. And what we do is we do all the work, get the license for our clients, up to eight free licenses, I think, per club. Really robust and great, easy to manage. And it also links up with the wealth management software, so it's all streamlined. So when you add a new entity into the Salesforce, it automatically gets well screened. So it's just seamless. It's really, really interesting. And it also does auto functionality on stewardship in terms of reminders, particularly around major gift, where we have very, very interesting stewardship practices that we impose. Retail giving or annual appeals, that goes to that retail class that I was talking about earlier, those people who didn't screen, and people who did screen well who haven't made a gift. And what we do is generally two appeals per year with our clubs, one in November, at the end of the year, and one right about now. We just did a spring appeal for San Francisco United, which I think has raised over $46,000. And it's not over yet, though. And that was in a 2-week period, by the way. So what do? It's push-pull, right? Now with email, it's so much easier. And with digital media. Launch, you need to determine good timing. Generally, there's that Giving Tuesday around then in November, early December. The content should be linked to funding areas, so you should be asking for a specific area. And we're going to look at a sample letter that does just that in a second, or email request. And then make sure you have data capturing mechanisms in place prior to launch so that you've got mechanisms when gifts come in to make sure that they're stewarded properly, as well as inputted properly into Salesforce. And in order to sustain it from year to year, there has to be consistent frequency in terms of appeal and messaging. The stewardship has to be impeccable, really, really strong. And ideally, particularly if they have potential, they can trigger into a major donor. You move them up the food chain that way. So what does a good appeal look like? And this went out 3 years ago in the spring. So I think it was late April, early May of 2018. And they have a August 1, July 31st fiscal year. The author of the email is Joe Dugan, who's the president of the club. And here I've got, the end of our fiscal year, SFDA community. So we like to, if at all possible, to customize it with names. And we work with our clients to do that. But in this case, we decided to just community play. The end of our fiscal year is July 31st, and we're on a mission to hit our Raise the Game 2018 campaign, so named campaign, which is smart, of $175,000. We've raised $113,405 to date and need your help in order to achieve our objective. Then they talk about success story of having increased the composition of teams 50% from 2017. And they were started as a club in 2014, by the way. And then the third paragraph is their commitment to financial aid, fields, and coaching. Average cost per player exceeds fees by $600. So you can see every player is getting financial aid, some full financial aid. And then the last short paragraph is a request. Consider donating. Use this link. Thank you. And the good news that came out of this is that we had that foundation meeting, which yielded a $500,000 gift through this campaign, which actually allowed them to raise well over $200,000 3 years ago, and they've kept steps since. So stewardship, I've talked to next slide 18, stewardship. Mentioned that stewardship is really neat, is thank you. It's getting a thank you out in a timely fashion. It has to be done by law. It includes your federal exempt number. And if you've given to your college, or you know what that is, get a thank you note, just basically. And it's essentially the fundamental backbone of all fundraising best business practices, because that's what's going to differentiate you how you thank and how often you thank and how well you thank, particularly with foundations, because they're in the business of giving money, therefore they're in the business of receiving thank yous. And so we have these really, really cool practices on how that we impose on clients when it comes to foundation stewardship. It varies by the room of the clubhouse. The next 7 webinars are going to explore each room in particular, and we're going to talk about stewarding for major gifts, stewarding for businesses. What does that look like? Stewarding for foundations. So you'll get a lot of that in the future. Moves management is a big part of stewardship, and we're going to do the major gifts webinar coming up is going to be about moves management, which is really how do you manage donors over time effectively? Donors, i.e. current parents, past parents, alums, foundations, businesses, and government. They can play a big role, particularly in facility development, as I mentioned with the example in Springfield earlier. And for best stewardship, your best friend is your CRM system, which really allows you to know your audience and to connect with the right people at the right time, given the reminder mechanisms that exist. But we'll touch on this heavily in upcoming webinars, specifically, again, around each of the rooms within the House of Development. And we're going to close with a really interesting slide that defines, so that it makes it very clear for you, there are 7 types of donors, 7. This was done, it was a research that was done by a woman named Karen Wright. And this is the research. In summary, this was her discovery. There's 7 faces of philanthropy. Not one is offended if they're asked for too much money. So that's the good news. You can always ask for more. All they'll do is bring you down or feel relieved that you didn't ask for more. All right, so nobody's offended. If I were to ask Hans right now for $100,000 to support, whatever's going on in Nashville, he would not be offended. He would bring me down or up or whatever, but he wouldn't be offended. So who are these 7 types? And they each have a belief system. The communitarian, doing good makes sense for a better community. The devout, doing good is God's will, and that's Sunday tithing. It's a huge portion of individual giving in this country. The investor, doing good is good business. They want to see a return on investment generally. The socialite, doing good is fun. This is where I have all my social activities, right? The altruist, doing good feels right. It's something I need to do because I myself benefited from all these things. The repayer, doing good in return. Right? We see a lot of that in churches. We also see a lot of that in universities in terms of people who may have gotten financial aid, a scholarship fund, and then doing really well in life and then going back and setting up their own financial aid endowment. Very common in universities. And they're repaying what they feel was something that was given to them. And then the dynamics, think Rockefellers, think Zuckerberg, think Bill and Melinda Gates, which is, it's what they do. They give money away. Doing good is a family tradition. And the United States is known for its families of dynasties, some much more generous than others. The Walton family, for example, of Walmart, hasn't given nearly as much as they should. And that's just a strong belief in the industry. But some have given great sums and are doing fantastic work. Warren Buffett is a great example of, not only is he a dynast, but he's also an altruist in that he didn't decide to set up his own foundation. He said, okay, I'm not going to reinvent everything. Bill and Melinda Gates have done this, so I'm just going to park my money with them and do good that way. That's really important. So you just understand that they exist, and generally speaking, you'll be able to recognize whom you're dealing with. So I'll pass it back to Mel, who's going to close it out. And thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Thanks, Rob. We appreciate it. We only received one question, which was, and I can answer it, which was, are we going to receive a recording of the webinar? And the answer is yes. And we'll even go a step further. What we've done for you all is create your very own web platform on Cogeo's website. So that way you can refer back to see this webinar and any of the webinars going forward. They'll all be available to you. We will also include a link to some of the resources that we think will help you execute some of the tactics that Rob mentioned on this webinar and the rest of the webinars in the Clubhouse of Development's webinar series. You'll also have an opportunity to get a hold of Cogeo. So if these tactics are something that you want to talk with us about how to apply directly to your club, we're happy to have that conversation with you. So you can reach us easily through there. Okay, that concludes the webinar for today. Thank you, Rob, and thank you everybody for joining.